This is Carrot. Thank you for joining us today on another episode of the Dihedral Podcast. Our guest today is an incredibly accomplished climber and writer. In addition to putting up first ascents all over North and South America, Chris Kalman has publications in several magazines, including Rock and Ice and Outside Magazine. He is a co-host of the American Alpine Club's The Cutting Edge podcast and has recently published his third book, Damned If You Don't. On top of all this, Chris is a conservationist who sits on the board of directors for the nonprofit Friends of Cochamó. Chris, what an honor to be talking to you today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Carrot. The honor's all mine, for sure.
I appreciate that. I always think the best place to start is kind of with the origin story of somebody. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into rock climbing.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I was born in South Dakota.
All right.
I'm not going to go that far back. No, I started climbing in a gym when I was 16 years old. I'm 36 now, about to be 37. So that's like 20 years ago. And at that time, I was living in Northern Virginia, and climbing was like outdoor climbing. There wasn't much around. And as far as indoor climbing, it was like way off the radar at that time. It definitely wasn't cool. It wasn't like something you would tell your friends about at school and be like, yeah, I'm a climber. You know, it's just like, I have this weird obsession that I do on the side and I don't really talk about it.
That's awesome.
I guess after that, I went to college in Southern Maryland. So I moved even further from outdoor rock climbing, but we did have a gym there. And I would take trips to like the New River Gorge. I would drive 7 hours to get there for like a weekend. That's how obsessed I was.
Yeah.
I finished college, moved to Colorado to work on a trail crew in Rocky Mountain National Park. And that's where I'd say what I would call like my current fascination with climbing, which is outdoor climbing. That's where that really took off.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I've just been bopping around out west ever since. And, you know, I kind of went through the ranks of boulderer to sport climber to trad climber to alpine, kind of back to single pitch these days is most of what I do. So it's been a real whirlwind.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in Flagstaff now, right?
Correct. Yeah. Flagstaff, Arizona.
Flagstaff seems like a real great central location. I mean, you're not that far from, Flagstaff has good climbing, but you're not that far. So for some really good world-class climbing as well.
Yeah.
Where do you like to go, like from Flagstaff?
Well, at the risk of sort of giving away local secrets or
Don't
something,
do it.
I will say this. If you draw like a 5-hour circle, like a 5-hour radius around Flagstaff, you get, maybe call it 6, just to be fair. You get Indian Creek, you get Zion, you get Red Rocks, Cochise Stronghold, probably some other areas that I'm forgetting that are also world class.
Yeah.
And I don't ever go to any of them.
That's great.
It's awesome, actually, because I think of that circle as like a force field that protects Flagstaff from incoming traffic from other places.
That's such a good point. They're driving out and bam, they got to stop at Indian
That's
Creek.
right. If you're coming from anywhere else, you're going to hit that force field and you're just going to stop because you're going to be like, wow, Red Rocks, why would I ever drive further?
Such a great way to put it.
And I wouldn't be so bold as to claim that what we have in Flagstaff is better than those places. But for me, it's certainly good enough. And because I'm a dog dad now, and like most of the time I'm doing single pitch or like 4 pitch at most climbs. I mean, I don't really need to go to Zion or Red Rocks and get on something big. I really enjoy the cragging around here, and I'm perfectly happy to bushwhack to a less visited area and, you know, have the place basically to myself or ourselves, you know, me and whoever I'm climbing with.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome, Chris. I just think that's a great way to look. I never thought about it as a force field, but that's exactly what it is. Way to find that center spot. So I do want to talk a little bit about how your climbing history influenced your latest book, Damned If You Don't. But before any of that, I was wondering if you could sort of share a synopsis of the story.
Sure, yeah. The I guess like the sort of short way I've been trying to describe Damned If You Don't is, imagine if John Muir existed today and the valley that he found, instead of being Yosemite Valley, was some pristine uh, remote valley down in Chilean Patagonia. Um, Same things happening, right? Like in Yosemite in John Muir's time, there was this initiative to dam the Hetch Hetchy River to provide drinking water for San Francisco and other things. Um, Muir fought that like with every ounce of his being to try and keep that from becoming a reality, and he ultimately failed. Um, but you know, in today's world of social media and kind of social media influencers and just everything that the speed at which information travels, you know, Muir's tactics were to write articles for like the Atlantic and big magazines at the time, and he visited with Theodore Roosevelt and tried to campaign with him, but he basically just tried to popularize the place in the public eye. um, Now, at that time, that didn't mean that like millions of people would just show up overnight, right? But if you did something like that today, millions of people would show up overnight. If somewhere like Yosemite that no one had known about before
Yeah.
suddenly became on the tip of everyone's tongue. And so I wanted to explore that kind of storyline. What would happen if someone tried to do that today? Because while I am strongly opposed to extractive industries in the remaining wildernesses in the world, I think it's time to start thinking about tourism, you know, and climbing sort of specifically in this book
Hmm.
as an extractive industry. I don't think we generally think of it that way, and we sort of talk about it more as a solution to the problem of extractive industries. But of course, if you've ever spent time in Yosemite Valley, you know that tourism has its own pitfalls as well.
Yeah. That's a great description. I just want to put this out there for anybody listening. This is a really good book, and I strongly recommend it. Whether you're a climber or not, I think there's a lot that you can get out of it. One of my favorite things about this book is that it challenges the reader to come to terms with the fact that we cause damages to our surroundings, whether we know we are or not. At this point, it's really unavoidable. And so, Chris, I'm wondering if you can speak to any specific instances in your life that led you to tackle the dilemmas that take place in Damned If You Don't.
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier that I'm on the board for Friends of Cochamó. So Cochamó is in many ways what this book is about. Although this book is a fiction, it's sort of a response to the time that I've spent in Cochamó. So Cochamó is a beautiful valley in Chilean Patagonia, like I was talking about.
Mhm.
Um, and I've gone there 7 times over the course of a decade or so, and it's just become a very special place to me. Originally, it was more for climbing reasons that I cared about it, but at this point, I could go down there and not even climb. The people that live down there are beautiful, and I love them, and I love the small community around Cochamó. Uh, the environment, the ecosystem, it's coastal rainforest. It's just incredible. Um, Totally native forest that's never been timbered. Rare endemic flora and fauna, crystal clear water. It's just staggering. It's probably my favorite place on earth. Um, the very first time I went there, the local citizens of the Comuna Cochimo, along with a couple of other NGOs, had successfully fought and stopped the proposed hydroelectric dam that would have been put in on the Rio Cochimo,
Yeah.
which is like, if you've ever seen pictures of the place, it's impossible to imagine anyone being so foolish as to dam that river because it's so beautiful. Um, so I had extractive industries in my mind from the very get-go, from the very nascence of my experiences with Cochimo. And because I'm a writer, that is something that I wrote about quite a bit. I wrote about climbing in Cochimo. I wrote about potential risks and threats to Cochimo. I tried to communicate with locals and become friends with them to understand what I could do to help, if anything, as sort of an outsider gringo who has no real claim to the place. Yeah. And I also saw the place grow in popularity tremendously over the years that I was visiting. So I sort of realized that the threats on Cochimo were sort of a pincer, and they were coming in from two sides. You know, on the one hand, you have the threat of extractive industries, hydroelectric dams, mining, timber, other forms of resource extraction. On the other side, you have tourism and the effects of an increasing tourist industry without any sort of, I don't know, structures in place to protect the valley from that increase in tourism. So, you know, it's not a national park, so there's no trail crew, there's no team of rangers, there's no law enforcement, there's no, you know, everything's sort of fly by night down there. I mean, it's not completely, people are working really hard to be organized and to do the right thing, but it's a constant game of catch up. And so I was sort of thinking, like, what happens at the intersection of these two different onslaughts? And what's the answer? You know, how do you kind of protect a place from both of those? And those questions really are what led me to write this book.
Man, that's perfect. You can see so many overlaps with what you're saying is happening there and is happening with you, with what's happening with John and
Yeah.
Dan, if you don't. And you know, Cochamó is an example of this happening all over the world. You know, I think of Sedona, Arizona. Like when I first started going there 20 or so years ago, there's a 2-lane highway. Now, if you go down there, there's just huge hotels everywhere. And the cost of that is much bigger than I think a lot of us can appreciate. You know, the cost of being able to lay your eyes on something beautiful, it ultimately destroys that thing that we're going there to look at. Yeah, that's an important conversation to have, and I'm not sure if there's a solution, right? Maybe there's no solution, maybe there's several solutions, but I definitely think your book does a great job of like trying to find that balance between those two things. Also, just on a side note, I think you sort of labeling climbing as a bit of an extractive industry it hits the nail on the head. I mean, it does damage, whether we want it to or not, whether we go up there to clean up trails. I mean, we're leaving a trail just to do that. I want to continue that conversation a little bit, but there's something else that I want to talk about with regard to the book that you're doing at the same time as delivering this really important message, and that's your development of your characters. I loved all of them. Even the bad guys. I'm just like, there's something about this person. You're able to lay their point of view on it. So even though they might be doing something you don't like, you can see where they're coming from. And so I was hoping you can talk a little bit about what you did to make that character development fall so seamlessly with the kind of greater message that you're trying to portray in this book.
Well, it feels really good to hear you say that, because certainly that, I think, is one of the biggest goals that I had with this book, was to make the characters believable. It's a really short story, so to get in a lot of plot, right? To, you know, there's, I don't know, 25 years or so that the story traverses, maybe less. But to get all of that in with character development was really a challenge, and I struggled with it a lot. I mean, I put more work into this book than any other piece of writing I've ever done. The reason why that was important to me is because I don't really generally believe in like good people and bad people, just as sort of a general worldview. There are certainly people I agree with and people I disagree with, but I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of people out there are a mixture. You know, they have areas in which they act in accordance with their morals and their values, and areas in which they fall short, and different dogmas and preconceptions that they were brought up with, which they have very little responsibility for. You know, I was raised in a culture where uh, something like racism or homophobia was absolutely verboten, disgusting, deplorable, and that's how I believe now as an adult. I'm very grateful I was raised that way,
Yeah.
because I can't say for certain that had I been raised a different way, I would believe differently. You know, people I think tend to believe what they were raised to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100%, right? But just as a tendency. And so I just think that's more accurate, like when you're talking about people out there, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, or whether they're for extractive industries or against them. And if we ever want to make progress in the world, I think we need to be able to respect one another and be able to hear one another, like where they come from, you know?
Yeah.
So there are people in the story that, you know, are trying to build a dam on this river, on the Rio Lahuenco. And rather than just paint them as some like Bond supervillain, I wanted to sort of round them out, because, hey, hydroelectric power is pretty clean, you know, better than a coal power plant, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can make cases for and against just about anything. And at this point in time, where everyone's all about solar, right? Solar power and electric cars. Well, there are costs to be confronted with those too.
Yeah.
Primarily lithium, I think, is a serious one. And if you look at where lithium mining's done today, it's basically in indigenous communities, often in South America, in sort of like the Atacama region. And those communities are being decimated by our quote unquote green consumption,
Yeah.
you know, by our efforts to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the whole point of this book is to point the finger inward,
Right.
because that's we love to point at other people. We love to say, hey, there are these problems in the world, and it's because of the Republicans, or it's because of the Democrats, or it's because of the Congress people, right? But what we rarely do is we point the finger inward and we say, here's how I'm responsible, here's how I can make a difference, here's how I can change things for the better.
Yeah.
So I wanted to erase sort of the idea of good and bad, you know, heroes and villains,
Mm-hmm.
and just have humans.
I definitely think you pulled it off. A lot of the characters were very relatable, so relatable that when we moved on to another character, I was just like, wait, what about Brooke? Like, what's happening with her? I'm wondering if
Right.
there's ever a possibility that your fingertips produce a sequel where we get to hear Braden's backstory or Brooke's backstory, or do you think that's the end of it for the characters in this book?
You know, I think for me, it's probably the end of it for this one.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of people reach out and say, hey, my only critique on the book, or my only frustration, is that it wasn't longer. Like, I want to know more about all these people and all these
Sure.
places. I am trying, so this is my second short book like this. And with these books, and that was a common sort of response to the first book too.
Mm-hmm.
With these books, I'm trying to invite people back into the process of reading, you know? Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know about the average listener out there, but when I pick up like a Dostoevsky novel, I feel very daunted.
Yeah.
Um, you can get 100 pages in and you're like, holy crap, there's so much book left to go. I don't know if I'll ever finish this. I wanted to make something that someone picks up and they look at and they think, I could conceivably read this in a day.
Yeah.
And then they get started, and I want the story to kind of move and like develop quickly enough and compellingly enough that they actually do read it in a day, even if they didn't intend to. Um, Now that has its own shortcomings, primarily what you've pointed out, that like some of these characters get left in the lurch. But I don't know. I just I want to do something different. I want to do something that's a little bit off the beaten path as far as our modern literature goes. Because by and large, when I look at a bookstore full of beautiful books that people have poured their hearts and energies into, I can't tell the difference from one to the other. You know, they're all like a 250 to 350 page novel.
Yeah.
Right. And those are all going to have about the same kind of arc and the same sort of character development and plot and stuff like that. Well, I'm a self-published author that nobody's ever heard of. So the best thing I could do is do something that looks different, because I am different, right? If I try to replicate what everyone else is doing, why would you pick the self-published guy when you could pick someone from Simon and Schuster?
That's such a great point. I mean, speaking about just the book itself, it 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 fits in a backpack for one thing. Like, it's going to be tough to carry War and Peace, you know, as you're blazing the trail or something like that. It's small enough that you can read it on the trail about the trail. And not only that, but the artwork in the book is great. I mean, it's just beautiful pieces that separate the chapters. We could go on and on about how enjoyable it is on so many different levels. It just really is. I was hoping we could focus a little bit on John. I kind of see his journey as a series of trolley problems, you know, like these personal moral dilemmas where he either has to save the valley or save his relationship or save his friendship or save the salamander. Do you think more generally that life boils down to a series of trolley problems or trolley-like problems?
Maybe if you're unfortunate, it might. I haven't faced that myself. In fact, I think what I would say is that most of the times in my life, when I've been confronted with situations like that, the right solution solves all the problems most of the time. And the things that aren't solved are the less important things. John is sort of, you know, he's a version of who I don't want to be and who I hope I don't become. And I don't think I'm at risk of becoming John Mercer. But I think those situations are compelling because it often feels like you have to do one thing or another thing. And one of the central ideas about John is that he's a loner. You could argue totally self-imposed as well. And I think a lot of the characters in the book would say that about John, that he's not actually alone, but that he chooses to be alone, or that he puts up barriers to make himself alone. Well, yeah, situations can seem totally like there's only one solution when you're working like all on your own. You know, when you let in a larger community and you accept advice from your lawyers or advice from your loved ones, you know, it's a lot easier to solve problems. So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I don't think that life has to come down to that. I think the answer is to be a little bit more immersed in your community so that you know when to ask for help and when to take it.
That's great. It really is. As I was reading this book, it reminded me of this quote from this author, E.B. White. And I like this quote. I think what you're saying about John sort of overcome some of the problems with this quote. I want to read it to you and let me know if you would connect this to kind of John's mentality. He said, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy it." Almost like those two things are kind of at odds. And to me, that was just like, that's John Mercer right there. I do think, like you were saying, there's a place to enjoy improving the world as well. But anyway, I was wondering if you could give your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a really resonant quote. I don't know, when did Evie write that? Do you know?
No, I should have done more. It's just, you know, this is a quote that a colleague of mine used to end all of her emails with, and it just stuck in my head. And now I think about it probably more often than I should. But
well, I mean, it's
have the exact date.
It's got to be old, right? Because like Strunk and White, elements of style, like, you know, Evie, he goes way back. So it's just amazing to me that we're still grappling with all the same issues and all the same questions. You know, what we're experiencing isn't new, and this question of like, do you save the world or do you enjoy it? I mean, I don't think there's one answer to that. it kind of brings to mind this this ecologist, John Seed, who I read when I was in my undergrad in an environmental ethics class. John Seed is this Australian guy who was working to protect the rainforest in Australia. And I remember reading this interview with him, and the interviewer, right? He's an interviewee. Yeah.
Yeah.
The interviewer asked him, how do you like maintain energy and enthusiasm for what you're doing when you're constantly losing? You know, you're just all the time getting owned by these, you know, timber companies or whoever it was that was chopping down the rainforest.
Yeah.
And Seed's response was, I do this without attachment to the outcome. I do this because it is what brings me fulfillment in life. It's what makes me feel good about being a human and about myself. He was acting in accordance with his values.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we just need to be honest with ourselves about what fulfills us. You know, you may work for a conservation nonprofit and find that it totally saps your energy, and at the end of the day, you have nothing left to give to yourself or to the places you love. Or you might find that it rejuvenates you. You know, there's not a right or wrong answer. Not everyone needs to work for a nonprofit, and some people definitely should.
Yeah.
The answer is probably individual. It's what's going to work for you. And so again, I would say, rather than a trolley problem here, how can these things coexist?
Mhm.
How can protecting the world coincide with enjoying it? And I
Beautiful.
think there are solutions for that. I think there are ways that you can do both.
I mean, you're kind of a living example of that with what you were talking about and what you're doing with friends of, correct me, Cochamo.
Yeah, that's
Um,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah, it's clear that you enjoy what you're doing and you enjoy the area, and that enjoyment leads to kind of this idea of service to protect the area. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you can give us a little bit more details on that nonprofit. If people want to get involved or people want to look more into helping out, where would they go? How would they do that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I don't want to over aggrandize my contribution. Um, I do very little. My my involvement with Cochimo is certainly peripheral, and anything that I've done stands on the shoulders of really serious, effective, intelligent, grassroots, local NGOs that are down in Chile, and they're doing great work, as well as business owners down there that are all working to make that place sustainable and to protect the biodiversity. So Friends of Cochimo is just, it's a new organization. No, it doesn't have any employees. Everyone's volunteering time. And our goal is just to bolster the efforts of the local people on the ground there. So there are local nonprofits that are working to protect the Cochimo Valley. We just want to bring attention to what they're doing and to try and raise money to help. So if you want, you can go to friendsofcochimo.org. I guess you'll probably do like a social media post. You can, you know, rather than spell it out here, you can spell it and people can copy paste. But yeah, you can go to friendsofcochimo.org. There are donate buttons there, so you can donate that way. You can also look up, I think it's vallecochimo.org. I'll find the exact URL, but you know, honestly, like I would say go donate to the local organization if you really want to support Cochamo, because they're the ones that are on the ground down there. We're Friends of Cochamo is sort of US based, even though we have directors from Chile and Argentina. So it's sort of, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're like 2 years into being an organization, and I think anyone that's got a new nonprofit that's young like that will tell you it's a constant learning process, even figuring out who you are and what you do. So I don't know if that's sort of a long answer to a short question, but
a great answer.
Yeah, get involved with the local organization, especially if you're going to go down there. You know, think about giving back a little bit financially too.
Yeah. And on top of everything else that's going on, you're experiencing a river passing through the front of your house right now. What's going on in Flagstaff causing these floodings and these fires? My goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Today we're good, like no rain in the forecast for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
But so yeah, we moved to Flagstaff about 3 years ago, right at the tail end of a monsoon season, which is normal. It's totally normal for there to be monsoons here in the summer, which is just a seasonal rain that happens around the same time every day. Now, for the last 2 years, we haven't had them, which I think most climate scientists would agree has something to do with climate change. And in the meantime, we had persistent drought conditions and wildfires. And so one of the wildfires we had was just a few miles from our house. And what happens after a wildfire decimates a slope, like a mountain slope or a hillside, is that the soils become destabilized. And in the case of a rain, the ground doesn't absorb that water. And so it just hits the ground and sloughs off all of the debris left over from the fire. So after 2 years of serious drought, we finally have had a regular monsoon season. In fact, it might even be a little bit over average, which is great because we really need it.
Yeah.
But that water's been hitting the burn scar and just sloughing mud and debris all the way down our street. So, it's just fascinating. Like anyone that lives out west, I think, is more keenly aware of climate change and natural disasters today than they probably ever have been before.
Yeah.
And it's sort of fascinating. I grew up on the East Coast where there's basically no public lands to speak of. We don't have like Bureau of Land Management out there, Forest Service.
Yeah.
Maybe in small patches, but not like out west. And so you don't know anything about like what it's like to have large expanses of non-human land. And on the one hand, that means you don't get access to incredible wilderness. Like I can walk from my house to the Arizona Trail and then walk all the way to Utah or Mexico and be in kind of wilderness the whole way. That's incredible. But at the same time, we're exposed to natural disasters. And, as climate change gets more and more severe, those disasters are just going to get more and more prevalent.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're doing all right. I'm glad you guys are staying dry. I notice you have your drying rack. I imagine that's from you swimming.
No, that's just how we dry our clothes. I mean, it's so dry here, even during like a normal monsoon season. I can take clothes out of the washing machine in the evening, put them up on the drying rack inside with the windows closed, and they're dry overnight. So
great. That's a great move. There's so many more things that I'd like to talk to you about, but we're kind of running short on time. Hopefully, actually, anytime you write a book, we'd love to have you. But if you ever want to come and just chat, like we would love, seriously, I'd love to just tackle some ideas about climate change and more characters and future projects. So hopefully you'll agree to sit with us again. Before we close, most of our conversations, we try to end on something a little more lighthearted. So I've come up with a series of kind of not really moral dilemmas, but they're either or dilemmas that I'd like to put you through, where if you're forced to say one way or the other, we'd like to see where you'd lie. If you're up for it, would that be all right?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So I think I just wrote 5 of them. So here's the first one. For the rest of your life, you can only wear rental shoes while climbing, or you can only use floor chalk.
Wait, what's floor? Oh, like in the gym.
Yeah, you got to pat the floor for your chalk.
Floor chalk, definitely.
I agree. That one, they don't all have a right answer. That one has a right answer.
No, I'm really big on footwork. I'm not strong enough to rely on like strength and like hand contact strength and all that. Like I climb vertical terrain mostly, and footwork is everything.
You gotta have.
I need my shoes.
Exactly. All right. Here's another one. You write a book that you're wonderfully proud of, but no one will ever get a chance to read it. Or you write a book that you're embarrassed to be associated with, but it brings you great fame.
That's a good one.
That's a tough one. I go back and forth.
the really interesting thing is like the answer I want to give, obviously, is the one where I'm proud of what I've done.
Yeah.
That's like the answer you want to give as like a human. But the answer that I would give, if I'm to be totally honest, right, is probably
Yeah.
give me the fame and fortune, you know, because you can redeem yourself too. You can write another book that doesn't suck. I don't know.
I
But
I agree.
I constantly aspire to be just a little more Zen, maybe a little more Taoist, you know, just like totally non-attached from everything, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be attached to climbing. I don't want to be attached to the quality of my work or to the professional reception that it gets.
Right.
But hey, I'm human, man. I am attached. Like we're all trying to do our best and to be respected for what we do. So yeah, tough one.
It's a tough one. That was a good answer though. Okay, here's another one. So you can do everything but the last move on your dream route, or you can do everything but the first move on your dream route.
Woo! I would go with last move. I find, yeah, like I get really turned off when the first move is the shutdown.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of fun. That said, like you could just call it C1, right? And you just
Right.
like
Yeah, yeah,
pull through on
exactly.
a bolt. I don't know. That's tough. I'll go with my first answer, last move.
All right.
Victory.
Yeah,
Pretend
yeah,
like
yeah. Why not? You reach up and throw that.
yeah.
That's perfect. All right. So for the rest of your life, you can only climb one route. Like you can climb it as many times as you want, but you only get one route. Or you can only read one book. Again, you can read it as much as you want, but only.
Wow. These are tough. Oof. I I I think I'm gonna go with one route.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think so. I would say I get more joy and pleasure out of climbing than out of reading. But I think that reading has a greater capacity to provide long-term satisfaction in my life.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm gonna learn more about being a human, being a good human, being uh a member of this planet by reading than by climbing. Not to say climbing doesn't teach you anything, but I just think, you know, climbing is sort of constantly becoming less and less central to who I am and to what I do.
Yeah.
And I certainly hope I climb always, all the way up until the very end. And that's my goal.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever change that goal. But I used to be willing to die for climbing, honestly, and
Right.
I'm not even remotely interested in that anymore. Not even remotely willing.
Right.
And just in general, like it's a much smaller part of my life. I think I've climbed honestly like 6 times in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I got married. My second book was published. I got accepted into grad school, which starts in a week. You know, a lot of other things. I've kind of like changed my diet to become a little more healthy.
Yeah.
So all of this other stuff is starting to become more and more important. So I guess I'll have to go with one climb. I guess make it Japanese gardens. And
Perfect.
then
I think that's
there's no climb better, I guess, than
a
that.
great
That's
answer.
kind of like the perfect rock climb.
So one more, and this one, we already know that you're not writing this book. So this is just a large hypothetical. So
Sure.
you do decide to write a book about Braden's journey, right? From
Mm.
your most recent book. But for some reason, you have to call it either A Bird in the Hand or Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
Hmm. I think I I think I like a bird in the hand. I think I often use like birds in symbolism.
Okay.
Or sort of birds are like a great vehicle to take, you know, when you're making a painting, right, or composing a photo, they say like make sure there are elements so that the viewer's eye like goes from the top left across the screen, like maybe back into the middle, and finds the subject. Then I'm trying to learn to do the same thing with writing, and birds are a great way to do that, right?
Absolutely.
So I think I'd go with a bird in the hand. I'm also trying, like, Damned If You Don't is, I love the title. I feel like it's so perfect for this book, but I also worry it's a little too on the nose.
Yeah. I get that.
That's something I struggle with a lot. Like, I used to write poetry all the time, and an ex-girlfriend, I think, was like, you just sound like you're trying to prove something to people, like you're not like just developing the aesthetic beauty of this idea, you're like trying to prove something. And I come from like a mathematical analytical background, so that makes sense.
Right.
So I think sometimes I need to leave stuff a little more up to the imagination, and so Between a Rock and a Hard Place might be a little too on the nose.
Too much, yeah. I think those were all really great answers. I just want to thank you so much again for joining us. But before we part ways, I want you, if you could, just let people know where they could find the book. And then if there's anything else you want to plug or promote or just sort of shine a light on, please feel free to do that.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, first of all, yeah, it's totally a pleasure of mine to be on the show. I love what you guys do. I love that it's a little bit different from like the typical, climbing podcast, I guess. And I've read up a little bit about you guys, and a lot of you have sort of a philosophy background, and I've majored in philosophy for my undergrad. So
that's spectacular. That's all. I'm a philosophy professor, so like
awesome.
I didn't want to even talk about this during the book, but there were so many little philosophical things in the book that I was just so impressed with, and just the language that you use. I was just like, oh, this is great. So I'm glad you brought it up. So I didn't have to. But yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. Yeah, I enjoyed chatting with you because it did get a bit philosophical there, and I like that. Okay, so to get the book, you can get it at my website, chriskalman.com. I'm still sort of uncomfortable having a URL that's my name, but I don't know, it's like just a digital business card, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, chriskalman.com is where you can get it. I think it's only in 2 retail stores right now. There's one in Lander called Wild Iris in Lander, Wyoming, and locally here in Flagstaff at Brightside Books. If you're in the UK, you can get it through Vertebrate Publishing. That's my UK distributor. And I think that's about it for if you want to get the book. So that's how you do that. Check out Friends of Cochimo. Check out, I believe it's vallecochamo.org. Let me just double check that.
And we'll link all these things too on the promo. So if you're listening and you're not getting them, just click on one of the links.
Yeah, so go to vallecochamo.org, and that page you can translate into English if so needed. And beyond that, I guess just to throw out like a fun thing to for other people to check out the author David Stevenson. David is an incredible author. He's got a new book out called Something About High Places. I'm terrible with remembering titles, but I'm looking for it. I just read it. It was so good. Anyway, David Stevenson's great. He's a really good guy, and he's sort of under the radar. So, get some of his books and enjoy them. I think they're incredible. But yeah, that's it. Thanks again for having me. It was a blast. A pleasure.
Absolutely. A million thanks.